the big brunt is going to be borne by the American consumer. There's no question. And the cars alone, I think a pickup truck, which is the emblem of the MAGA people, a pickup truck which is assembled in Ontario, most of them are, is going to go up $12,000. They're not going to like that when they go to swap in their pickup truck for a new one. And that's completely owing to these tariffs.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report with me, Louis Sykes. Today we're speaking with Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington. She's editor-at-large with the National Post newspaper and has a best-selling Substack with regular updates on geopolitics and the United States. Diane, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, lots to discuss today. Trump is set to speak with Putin on the phone tomorrow about a potential ceasefire in Ukraine. Is this the moment of truth, or is Putin more than capable of playing for time with Trump?
Well, I think there's been several moments of truth. The first moment of truth was February 2022 when he invaded Ukraine after saying he wouldn't. And the second moment of truth is that he just snubbed the 30-day ceasefire that Ukraine has agreed to. And, this was after Rubio said, well, if they turn it down, we know their intentions. Well, we all know their intentions. They're murderous, they're genocidal, and he's a megalomaniac. And, so now he's snubbed Trump's deal. The ball now is no longer in his court; it's in Trump's court. What is Trump going to do about this? And this is what we're waiting to hear. I think Putin is outsmarting him so far.
The White House has just now, in a press conference, said that they've never been closer to peace. I mean, are you hearing that from your contacts in Ukraine?
I don't know if they're right. I hope they're right. I mean, I really hope that they've got their finger on it and that Putin has sort of given some indication that, yeah, okay, I've had my fun. But, he's been playing tricks too. There have been reports about the Ukrainians being surrounded and slaughtered in Kursk and driven out of Russia. That's not true. None of that's true. None of that is true. And if there is a faltering in the front lines, it's because of this dilly dallying. I mean, if I was a young man in a Ukrainian trench facing a barrage of North Korean soldiers who are cannon fodder, and I'm reading the social media, and I see that there's going to be a truce soon, or probably the end of this. Am I going to stay, or am I going to go home? Am I going to fight to the death, or am I going to, push retreat slightly? So obviously, there's a lot of morale issues on the Ukrainian side. Which I think may account for some of the little setbacks, but they're not major setbacks. Frankly, Ukraine has put the boots to, excuse the expression, put the boots to Russia.
And on Kursk, I mean, do you think we should really even expect anything to be agreed with Russia before Kursk is kind of taken back?
Well, I was hoping that Kursk wasn't taken back so that it could be a bargaining chip for something that Ukraine may hold out for. I don't think it's really all that relevant right now. I just don't want more people to die in a war that they can't win. Neither side can win.
And European leaders claim they're pulling together their coalition of the willing. Is Trump going to keep supporting that? Because he was quite keen originally on this idea of peacekeepers. Does he want to go back on that at all? And does that mean anything if the US won't provide that backstop?
Well, there has to be a backstop because the Americans are not going to do it. But my concern is that Trump is just hungering for a deal. He wants a win. He wants a victory. He wants to end it, which is all good. I mean, we're all on that side. However, I can see him being outwitted again by Putin. Putin will suddenly say at the last minute, well, we have a deal, but I don't want any European soldiers inside Ukraine ever. He's already said he doesn't want them to have an army, which is, not even negotiable. So, there are some sticking points that I think we are far from having resolved. And I don't think Trump has got a couple of cards to play. He likes to use the card metaphor. He's got a couple of cards to play. First of all, he can slam Russia with more sanctions. And the second thing is he can just flood Ukraine with horrible weapons.
And on that, I mean, how much patience do you think Trump will have for this? Some people are worried he may just, if he does run out of patience, he'll just abandon this as an issue himself. But how long is he going to let Putin play for time on this? Do we think? I mean, he has set that 100-day target for himself, hasn't he?
That's right. He set the 100-day target, but he also had a 24-hour target that he kicked that football down the field. So he can also move the goalpost when it comes to June. The 100 days is up. But I think that he's got to be starting to become slightly embarrassed and concerned about the fact that Putin is maybe just leading him on.
And how important do you think the change in the way NATO and America uh, interact at the moment is becoming?
Well, he has a good relationship with the head of NATO, Mark Rutte, but that doesn't mean much. Basically, I think the important things that have happened are the following: the British have remained steadfast. I mean, Starmer was the one to pull together the coalition of the willing. Macron is on side, and finally, the Germans have a leader that's a leader, and Germany is back, and they're talking about being able to spend up to $1 trillion to create an army. Now that sends a lot of people. That makes a lot of people frightened because Germany ruined the last century a couple of times, 2 wars. But listen, we need Germany. We need Germany, Poland, France, and Britain to pull together and just say we don't care whether you like the coalition of the willing or not. We're putting them there, and we're going to sanction you even more. And they've also got to stop buying Russian gas and oil. As Trump pointed out recently, I don't know if the numbers are exactly correct because you can never trust his factuality, but he did say that the Europeans have been buying more gas and oil from Russia than giving way aid to military aid to Ukraine. I mean, that's ridiculous. So, the Europeans have a lot to answer for. But I think that there is a coalition, that there's a coalescence. People are just fatigued and upset by all of this and want it over.
Well, elsewhere in the world, quite dramatic strikes on the Houthis over the weekend by the US. Is that a sign that Trump is not much for peacemaking in the Middle East?
Oh, well, look, he's got a whole other problem in the Middle East, and that's the other war he wants to solve. In the fantasy of his mind that this will get him a Pulitzer Prize if he can stop Ukraine and the Gaza situation. The Houthis are backed by Iran, and they're part of the terrorist network that Iran and Russia finance, and that China provides technology to. This is the evil axis, and I'm not surprised that they probably did some kind of strategic bombing because somebody important was there, or some missiles were there, or something or other. But no, it's not over. The Middle East is an absolute mess still, and that's going to take a lot of time.
And do you think, I mean, has there been anything you've seen from Trump or the US administration so far on Iran that could give us any confidence that there could be an agreement reached on that at some point in this administration?
Well, there's this idea that the Russians have floated to Trump that they will help them control Iran. Well, they haven't done any of that, and they don't mean that, and they're stringing him along to gain more inches on the battlefield in Ukraine or whatever he's all about. And he shouldn't fall for that. Uh, Trump has had some very tough talks and said some very nasty things about Iran and its nuclear ambitions. And to which the president of Iran said, "Well, you can threaten us all you want. Do the hell whatever you want. We don't care. We don't care about you." And so Iran is, sort of giving them the finger. And Iran, China, and Russia symbolically, but meaningfully, held major naval exercises in and around the Middle East. China, Iran, and Russia. So they're not shrinking from things.
And how much should the US's allies be worried that Trump just doesn't seem to recognize that wider alliance of those three nations?
Well, I think that's terrifying to the Europeans because we know Russia has designs on parts of Europe after Ukraine, and so that's very upsetting. And then as far as the Iranians, Europe has suffered a great deal from the turmoil that Iran and its terrorists have created in the Middle East. I mean, that was behind the collapse of Syria, and I think 12 million Syrian refugees poured into Europe, creating disruption and now not necessarily assimilating very well with the outbreaks of criminality and radicalism here and there. So Europe has been a victim also of the failure uh, by the world, them included, to do something about Iran and Russia. And I think that the creation of a European armed force or armed alliance over and atop NATO or EU, which I think we see slowly kind of forming with the big four involved, may help the Americans in their attempt to stop the violence and clean up the Middle East and do something about Russia.
And we saw recently that Trump had announced they don't want the Americans don't want to continue participating in joint exercises in Europe, at least for the time being. I mean, is that maybe a worrying sign that Trump really is not that dedicated to NATO?
He's not dedicated to NATO. He's made that very clear. He thinks most of them are freeloaders. Compared to the US, they all are. And some of them are pulling up their boots, but it's a little late. And then it's also disheartening for the Americans to send tons of military aid to Ukraine. The Europeans have done a lot in terms of humanitarian aid, but not military aid, and to be buying the oil and gas from the enemy. That's nuts. That's crazy. And so I think he has a lot of issues with the Europeans.
And do you think that extends as far as Article 5? Should people be worried about that?
Well, it's very interesting. I had an international legal expert take me through Article 5. It's not exactly, interesting reading, but this notion that it's one for all and all for one is not true. It is not true. Article 5 can be invoked by an attack on a NATO member, but each and every member can decide whether they're going to join in on the counterattack. So it isn't as it seems.
Well, back to the Middle East, Trump, alongside the Israeli government, is still driving ahead with this quite shocking Gaza plan. What have you made of that?
Oh Lord, I wrote a newsletter today called Mara Gaza. It's you know what? First of all, I want to say at least Trump is trying to do something. And when he tries to do something geopolitically, it's usually with a business slant. And building new housing is not going to create a nation or peace build or anything like that. He also takes a very business-like developer attitude. So his latest idea is to, he'll take over the ownership of Gaza, has a good beachfront, and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. And as to what happens to the 2 million people living in impoverishment, who knows? And the peace goes into an Arab counter plan. Are the Palestinians going to be help? Are they going to help rebuild it? Are they going to be evacuated? I mean, he's also talking to various African countries to take these 2 million people off his hands, as though they're an asset. I mean, it's just a shockingly ruthless business-like approach to geopolitics, which involves ethnic community, homelands, you know, civil rights, all kinds of things. But to him, this is a distressed property in the slums of New York. He's going to move the tenants out, put them in another slum until he's going to build something nicer. And if they can afford to live in it, fine. If not, who cares? That's the metaphor.
And moving those people, I mean, this seems like it would have to be done possibly by force. That would effectively constitute an international crime, seemingly. I mean, we don't know the details necessarily, but it would certainly fit the description in the way it's been explained so far. I mean, would that set a new precedent in the Middle East in the way that the US interacts with that region?
Well, forcible displacement is a war crime. And I would submit that this is going on all over the place all the time and has throughout history. I mean, the Sudanese are doing it, the Somalians are doing it. They take these religious groups that they disagree with, their political rivals, and they just move millions of them to another part of the country. I mean, this is going on all the time. And so this is just another one of those examples. As far as forcible removal, if I were a Palestinian, I might say, hey, thank God, anything but this. And if it was the Americans involved, it wouldn't be as decrepit as what they're now living in. I mean, it's just horrific with rubble everywhere and, old memories and inadequate housing. And it's pretty shocking, but this is what happens in war. If he was able to build a beautiful place and put them in it and they were happy to stay and they had the right to go back if they wanted to, I'd say brilliant. I'm not sure that's what's being devised here.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, closer to home, Canada has their new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. How are your fellow Canadians reacting to this?
Well, he's not elected. He's got to call an election immediately. He's really, you know, I mean, the whole thing is really embarrassing, I think. Uh, Good guy, seems okay, very smart, well connected, hobby nobby, Davos man, the whole thing. Whether this will impress Trump, no, it won't. So we'll see what happens. But, the Prime Minister of Canada is not there to impress Trump. The Prime Minister of Canada is there to sit down and talk to him on a business-like basis and say, what's your grievances? Here are ours. Let's fix this. You give this, we give that, and let's make it work. But don't start talking about, taking over the country or annexing it against our will or anything silly like that. Canadians are very upset. There was a poll recently that said 50% of Canadians, when asked, are not sleeping through the night. There's a lot of anxiety. When you have a big bully living next door, who's making noises about taking you over. What does that mean? We've all taken a hit, all Canadians, on our asset values. Our stock market is gone. Our currency is down. I mean, everybody's been hitting the wallet by this. And also, it's very psychologically demoralizing and upsetting. And do I think it's going to happen? No, it's not going to happen. He's not a conqueror. But it is got to be sorted. And you know, Trudeau was incapable of governing, much less negotiating with someone like Trump. Carney probably has more skill sets, and he certainly knows the pitfalls.
So, has there been a sort of rally around the flag effect, perhaps, for Canadians over this?
100%. 100%. Yes, it's united Canadians in a way that, I'm talking on a patriotic level. I'm not talking about, getting along necessarily any better politically, because we have provinces that are as big as European countries and they all have their own leaders and they all fight. And remember, Canada is not a republic. Like the United States, a unitary state with a strong federal government. The Brits created a very loose confederation to accommodate the French, frankly. And so each province has more rights than they should. And so it functions like a little European Union with all of the complications and disruption that can mean. However, to a man, woman, and child, Canadians are very upset that someone would even say, we're just going to make you the 51st state. And the other point on that is the 51st state is demeaning and insulting. Canada is geographically bigger than the United States, and it is richer geologically than the United States. And so to confine us to a statehood is very insulting.
The trade war that has erupted between the US and Canada, obviously that's continuing on. As you say, it's been pretty disastrous so far, but it actually looks, I mean, if you look at the numbers, that Trump might be losing it.
Well, he's losing it because of the blowback. I mean, when you tariff 80% of the exports of Canada's go to the United States. So 80% of the exports will have a 25% additional price attached to them. Now, that 80% is a big number for us. I don't know what it amounts to in the United States. Let's say 10% of their imports. That's a big price tag. And so there's a lot of disruption and a lot of juggling around of supply lines. So you're going to see certain manufacturing in Canada that sells to the US building up their branch plant operation in the US more. Still a Canadian company, still a Canadian product or service. So people are maneuvering their way around it. But the big brunt is going to be borne by the American consumer. There's no question. And the cars alone, I think a pickup truck, which is the emblem of the MAGA people, a pickup truck, which is assembled in Ontario, most of them are, is going to go up $12,000. They're not going to like that when they go to swap in their pickup truck for a new one. And that's completely owing to these tariffs. So he's doing something very, very bold. And now, what's the positive, and why is he doing that? He's doing that actually to collect more money to pay down the debt to make the United States richer and more capable of doing what it wants around the world.
Last time we spoke, you said the US economy was in great shape. Uh, would you say the same now?
Look, it's a very powerful economy. It's turning over nicely, but the financial markets are roiling. They're up, they're down, it's all around. And it's not because of anything he's done. It's the uncertainty of having a leader that turns on a dime, comes up with policies out of the thin air that are very disruptive. It's an uncertainty market. And that's always bad for values. People say, I'm cashing in, I'm getting out, the stock goes down. And so that is, I think, what's going on. But I understand that consumer sentiment's okay, and spending is fine, and job creation is okay.
So it might be that we maybe shouldn't watch too closely at what the US markets are doing in a time that is inherently quite unstable when a new administration comes in.
That's right. Now, for instance, I'm an investor. I don't even look at my portfolio. I don't want to know, because I know this is a period of uncertainty and a chaotic leader and so on and so forth. But the things that I own in the stock market, the companies are solid, great companies. They're not all American. There's some Canadian, there's some European, there's some Japanese. I'm not even going to get involved in the up and down. In the financial broadcasting world, the people that talk about the stock markets all talk about, they refer to the situation as, are the arrows up or are the arrows down? Like, they go up, they go down, they come around. You can't panic.
Mhm. And just finally, we've seen a lot more movement around the US's deportation programs. Um, that was a big issue for Trump in his first administration, certainly. The second time round, it seems to poll less highly with his voters. You know, is Trump willing to burn a lot of political time and capital on the deportation of migrants?
No, I think he's doing it. I think it's not as easily done as people think, because they're not, they're trying to target the real troublemakers first, and they gave them plenty of notice to hide. I think they're hidden all over the place, and so that will continue. I think where he's been hit quite a bit is with Mr. Musk's chainsawing of federal government jobs. A lot of the jobs are in the red states, the MAGA states, and a lot of people who probably voted for Trump have relatives or are themselves being axed by Mr. Musk's, vigorous cost-cutting efforts, and they are very huge. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people. So that has formed a backlash. Inflation's up a little bit, but the deportation, I must say, is popular, because that border was wide open, and that's just unacceptable. And so a lot of unsavory people came in.
Well, actually, one more thing, just on that Musk thing. I mean, if that goes wrong, Doge, politically, does that put Musk at risk in with his position in the US administration?
I don't think so. I think he paid Trump $250 million to get into the White House. He wants his money back. He's going to get his money back. He bought a Tesla from him. I mean, no, Musk cannot embarrass Trump publicly, and he hasn't, and he won't. He's smart, but no, he's going to carry on with it. This is a deeply seated American thing. Government is bad, And, this is something that a lot of people around the world, Europe and Brits and Canadians, just don't get. I'm originally American. Remember, this was a country that was started by guys who threw the tea in the harbor because they didn't want to pay taxes. They still don't want to pay taxes. They still will throw the tea in the harbor. They don't like government and they want freedom. That's who they are.
Well, Diane Francis, it's great as always to get your views on and insights on these things. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Trump
Thanks.
Report.
So, anytime.